So you're all very welcome. It's fantastic to see so many of you have joined us already. Thank you so much for joining us for this evening's 120 Dublin Stories with Santa Rita and the Little Museum. So tonight I'm joined by one of Ireland's premier archivists and a much loved social commentator, Catriona Crowe, who also happens to be a very generous board member here at the Little Museum. So thank you very much for joining us.
Very welcome.
And then I'm delighted also to have Giuliana Ippoliti. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Yes, it's correct. It's correct.
So Giuliana is the marketing analyst with the Dona Paula brand over in Argentina. And Giuliana joins us this evening directly from Mendoza. And I guess I'd be curious to start off by saying thank you so much for joining us. And I'd be really curious just to ask, you know, how are you? How are your colleagues? How are the vineyards? How is life in Mendoza at this particular moment?
Well, nice to meet you. It's a pleasure for me to be today here. And well, nowadays it's kind of a particular thing here in Mendoza. You know, all the world it's living like a special moment, but it's beautiful because you wake up and you see the mountains and you see the vineyards. So you can see it from your home, and that's something spectacular. I don't know if all of you know Mendoza, but Mendoza is a city that is in the western Argentina, and is the center of Argentinian wine industry. It's also very near to the Aconcagua, the highest mountain outside the Himalayas, for you to know the dimensions. And it holds the 75% of the total vineyards in Argentina and the largest number of wineries in the country. Here in Mendoza, we have almost 150 wineries in the country. It makes it, Mendoza, the most important wine province and one of the main producing centers in the world.
Wonderful. Gosh, it's incredible to see how concentrated such a large amount of production is in such a small area, and it'll be fascinating this evening to learn a bit more as we go through the tasting. And Catriona, just to welcome you as well and say the area of conversation that we're going to have with yourself this evening is looking at the museum's collection and this idea of material culture. Just to start the conversation, could you just explain to me what the idea of material culture actually means?
Well, Sarah, material culture, I suppose, means any object that people intersect with in their lives. It did mean in this country and in other places for quite a long time, for museum purposes, high-end objects, beautiful furniture, valuable paintings, that kind of stuff. And in the last 50 years or so, that's changed, and museums are more interested now in acquiring everyday objects, things that most people intersect with. And there's some very good scholarship emerging out of all of that. There's people like Claudia Kinmont who did great work on Irish vernacular farm furniture, Lisa Godson on the things we remember from our homes if we're Catholic, like the Sacred Heart lamp and the statue of the Virgin Mary. One of my favorite religious objects is things that are gone now, but there used to be glass statues of the Virgin Mary with the screw-off blue crown on the top, filled with water from Lourdes. And many households had those. I don't know if we have one in the museum, but we certainly should try to acquire one. So people are taking more of an interest in everyday things that intersect with a lot of people's lives, rather than just the lives of those who are rich enough to afford very expensive furniture or paintings or clothes. For example, in our National Museum, we have a fantastic textile section, which has beautiful, beautiful 18th century gowns, very good stuff from maybe Jorgensen and great designers like that. But what we need to be doing is actually collecting every year from pennies and Dunn stores, collect the clothes that people are buying for themselves because they're cheap and cheerful and easy to buy. So we have a snapshot in the future of what people are actually wearing in the beginning of the 21st century. So that is starting to happen, I think. So I've picked a lot of things tonight that are kind of everyday objects that a lot of people will have intersected with in one way or the other.
Wonderful. And I think it is, this idea of material culture is particularly interesting at the moment as well. I know I'm finding as the pamphlets are arriving in my door in relation to the pandemic going on, part of me has been kind of putting them in a folder, realizing that they probably will be brought into the museum at the end of all of this. And so as you said, you've picked a couple of items that we're going to chat through this evening. But before we start talking about them, Giuliana, could you tell me what wine we're going to be drinking and tasting and learning a bit more about this evening?
Yes, sure. Today we are going to be tasting Los Cardos Cabernet Sauvignon. I know that all the people know in Argentina, yes, that one, know Argentina about Malbec, but we have a Cabernet, really, really good Cabernet Sauvignon, and it's very important for us to all of you to understand that Argentina is not only Malbec. We have a lot of different grapes, and red grapes, white grapes. They are really, really good and really good to taste.
And so in a Cabernet Sauvignon, so this evening I have, as you said, the Dona Paula Los Cardos Cabernet Sauvignon. I'm tasting the 2018 vintage. What might I be able to taste? What flavours and what profiles would you get from a grape like this?
The Cabernet Sauvignon from Dona Paula, from Los Cardos, it's very expressive and it's very spicy in the nose. You may find black pepper aromas and cassis too. And in the mouth, you're going to be able to taste black fruit and gentle tannins. It's a very elegant and a wine with a very long finish.
Okay, it's beautiful. And how would that compare to, say, a Malbec grape that you mentioned? Because I know
yes, the Malbec grape, it's more fruity and it's more floral. In the nose, it's really more floral. Here you can find spicy notes of black pepper, and Malbec, it's more floral.
Okay, that's interesting. I'm finding this fascinating with Terry over the last couple of weeks and yourself this week, just learning a bit more about wine as we're going on. This has been one of my closure learning.
The wine industry and all the wines are very interested because I think that it's very subjective thing. Maybe some people can find some aromas and can taste some aromas, and other people, maybe they can find another ones. So it's not like one way. You can find it very different things in the wines.
Different, it makes it more conversational. Well, now that we've got our glass of wine in front of us, Catriona, I'd love to ask you to tell us a story. When we were chatting earlier this week, you'd mentioned the lemonade bottle that we have in the museum and the fact that that has a particularly interesting story to tell.
There's the stuff in the museum is really, it's mainly a 20th century collection. So you can look through it and find things from every decade of the 20th century that are interesting. The lemonade bottle is special. It's an ordinary lemonade bottle that people at the time would have bought and drank their lemonade from every day. But this particular lemonade bottle was on the RMS Leinster, which was the mail boat that sank just in Dublin Bay, hit by a German torpedo, literally 2 weeks before World War I ended in 1918, which is sort of tragic. Now, there were a lot of soldiers returning to the Western Front on the boat, which is why the Germans saw it as a legitimate target. But there was also a sorting office, because this was the mail boat and people sorted the mail. There were 5 deliveries of letters every day in Dublin at that time, right? People wanted their mail very quickly. It was their version of texting, I suppose. We would just take it for granted. We can text all the time. They wrote letters and postcards and they got there very fast. So these wonderful sorters are down at the bottom of the boat, sorting the mail on its way to England, and they're hit bang on by the torpedo. It actually hits the mailroom. So all of them perished except one man who had the sense that there was some electric wiring that was dislodged by the explosion. He was able to hold on to that and to prevent himself from being drowned and get out through a trapdoor and survive to tell the story. But the Maritime Museum in Dunleary, which is a fantastic place,
amazing,
of course, on the same level as the Little Museum of Dublin, which is the best museum in Ireland, but a fantastic museum nonetheless. And they devote themselves to maritime history, and there are 2 wonderful men there who have done huge research. They have created a database of everybody who died on the RMS Leinster with lots of contextual stories about who they were. And it's really worth a visit to go there and have a look at it and find out more details. Honeymoon couples, women and children, soldiers going back to the front, and the people from the sorting office. So it was the biggest drowning in the Irish Sea ever in 1918. And here's this lemonade bottle that comes to us mysteriously out of the fiasco and still has not been opened. Now, it would be a very brave person who would open that lemonade bottle and take a slug out of it. And I'm not volunteering. But it's fascinating to think that the lemonade is still swilling about inside, and it never met its destiny, which was probably to be consumed by a child on the RMS Leinster that day when they were crossing the Irish Sea. So now it's in the little museum. We can look at it and meditate on the sadness of the RMS Leinster.
It is amazing. It would be, as you said, there's that fascination of what may have been or what is inside and what that might have been like as an experience taste. But to those who are with us this evening, if anyone has a question for Catriona or Giuliana, please do type it in and I'll go through a few of them as the evening unfolds. But also, because Catriona is reflecting on some of the pieces in the collection, if you have any particular favourites or pieces that really resonate with you, please tell us. And I believe you should be able to see each other communicating on pieces as well. So that might be a fun conversation. But then within this idea of kind of objects that tell stories and kind of say using bottles and material of that sort, you were telling me recently that a couple of the saucers and cups in our museum have particularly interesting stories to tell also.
Well, Dublin, every Dubliner has their own Dublin, I always think, and the little museum contains a multiplicity of Dublins, as well as a shared Dublin that a lot of us can connect with. But one of the things we had in the past were beautiful hotels, and I'm ancient enough to remember quite a few of them. One of them, which of course I don't remember because it was destroyed in the 1916 Rising, was the Imperial Hotel on O'Connell Street. About half of what used to be the late lamented Cleary's department store, which should never have been shut down, stands on it stood on that site. And it's famously the hotel where James Larkin came to speak from the balcony of one of the rooms to the crowd that had gathered against the martial law that had been imposed to the plain people of Ireland, dressed up with beard that he didn't normally sport. So he got away with it and then had to be hustled away through the crowd. That was like, our decade of centenaries is fascinating and wonderful and we love it. But by God, did they have it in for the great buildings of Dublin. The damage that was done, particularly to O'Connell Street. Not just once, but twice, because we had 1916 and then we had the Civil War. So the Imperial is alas gone, but there's a lovely saucer that survives from it. And of course, hotels in those days used to brand their own crockery. So you get a lovely branding exercise on that. And then there are 4 teacups from 4 hotels, only one of which now survives. And that's the Royal Marine in Dunleary, which is still a very beautiful hotel in a splendid location looking out over the sea. But there's also the Dolphin Hotel from East Essex Street, where I, on a misspent night, lost a beautiful silver and turquoise ring that my American aunt had given me that I cherished. And I was washing my hands, I took it off, washing our hands. Yes, wash your hands is very important. It was important that night too. But alas, my beautiful ring vanished down the plug hole and was not to be found. And I often dream about it and think I'm back in there and there it suddenly is on a shelf. The Dolphin was gorgeous. Then the other 2 are the Royal Hibernian, which a lot of people will remember, which was on Dawson Street, where the Royal Hibernian Way is now. At least they named something after it. Again, a beautiful 18th century building, lovely dining room, bang in the middle of the city, a lovely place to go and have your dinner in the evening. And I've forgotten what the last one is now, and I don't have a note in front of me. But anyway, there's another one that is gone, alas. And from each of them, a teacup survives. So if you went in to have your afternoon coffee, you could get one of these beautiful cups. So all these things, a lot of people would have encountered, and there are stories behind all those encounters about people meeting in hotels for all kinds of interesting reasons, for love affairs, to break up, to do all kinds of things, business meetings, whatever people meet in hotels for. And these cups were silent, mute witnesses to all of those human stories. So they're really lovely things to have.
That's a lovely way of thinking about it, the cup that tells 1,000 stories. But Giuliana, I see a question here that was something I was hoping to ask you myself, and I might take this this reader's advice. It's I remember this time last year, Dona Paula actually had a garden that was at bloom in the park, and it's amazing to think that that was 12 months ago, pretty much to the day. And I remember the garden that you guys created was called, it had the word altitude. Exactly.
Yes, matter of altitude.
Matter of altitude, that's it. And one of our users here is saying, I'm sat in the Dublin mountains in the sunshine. Why does being in the mountains actually make a difference to your wine?
Well, for you to know, Dona Paula, we have 4 different vineyards, and they are located at different meters above the sea level. One of them is El Alto vineyard, and it's located 900 meters above the sea level. The other one is Los Indios, that it's located 1,100 meters above the sea level. And Alluvia vineyard, it's located 1,350 meters above the sea level. How this affects our wines? The principal difference is that the height provides a really different I don't know how to express that. Provides a greater temperature range. The temperature range, it's really big, and the characteristics with these wines that have days more cold and nights more warm, it's that the wine became more fresher and longer.
Okay, and so this, say, Cabernet that we're drinking this evening, would this have been a high altitude or a low altitude wine?
Yes, it's a high altitude wine. It's located, it provides from El Alto, and it's come from 900 meters above the sea level.
My goodness. Yeah, it's very high.
Very much
yes.
So.
Yeah.
And actually, I noticed just looking at the bottle here, it does have the looks of the mountain range incorporated, but it also has the thistle flower.
Thistles, yes. Fire thistles there.
I know that maybe for the people who speak in English, it's very complicated to understand what Los Cardos means. And Los Cardos refers to the thistle flower. And why we decided to put this name is because in El Alto vineyard, where the Los Cardos wine comes, we have a lot of thistle flowers, and the viticulturists and the people who understand the terroir and study the terroir, all of them said that when you have thistle flowers in your terroir, it's an omen of a good harvest.
Okay, cool.
So we decided to say that, okay, if we have thistle flowers in our terroir and it's an omen as a good harvest, why a bottle of Los Cardos, it's an omen of a good moment. And with a bottle of Carlos, you're going to have a good moment.
Oh, it's beautiful.
Here's to Los Cardos and the thistles and good moments, which we're all having now, which is lovely.
Yeah.
And what would you say in Argentina? So say we would say cheers or slancha when we're toasting a drink. What would you say?
Here in Argentina, we said salud.
Okay,
well, salud.
Salud.
Salud. It would be a pleasure for me to have a glass of wine here, but I kind of have a problem with the bottle. But yes, salud for all of us.
Okay, well.
Salud, it's the same as cheers there.
I hope everybody in the audience is having a glass of wine too, because it wouldn't be fair for us to be quaffing when the sun is over the yardarm and the rest of you all sitting there in sobriety. So if you have any wine close by, even if it doesn't happen to be Los Cardos, have a glass. It'll be good for you.
Yes, and all for you to know, it's important for us to know that this 2020 harvest, for us, it's quite special in Argentina. Because it was really warm. It's what I'm saying about the altitude. It was really warm, and it made that the whites and the red grapes ripen faster than usual.
Okay.
So we have the white grapes this year 2 weeks earlier than usual. Mm-hmm. And regarding the red wines, we have it 1 month earlier.
Okay.
So we end the harvest session in April.
Yeah.
And we normally end it.
This is probably climate change, Giuliana, and everything happens faster than it should. So it's a nice thing for winemakers, but it may not be good for the planet in the long run. However, we're delighted for you because this means you get it earlier and in more profusion. That's wonderful.
Mm-hmm. And I guess, Catriona, I remember you telling me on the subject of wine, I remember you telling me before about a wine cellar sale that you remember from, I think it was the late 70s, early 80s, you'd mentioned, within the Findlaters group. Am I right in thinking that they really were quite an institution here in Dublin? Because I know we've got...
Findlaters were extraordinary. I mean, they had a huge store in Upper O'Connell Street. I researched them when I was looking at the whole period around the beginning of the 20th century. And at that point, they stopped in 1969. That's when Findlaters closed down. So I do remember them as a kid. But back in 1911 or so, they had the most extraordinary stuff, things that didn't appear in Ireland again. It sort of vanished after independence for about 40 years. You know, olive oil, proper olive oil, not olive oil for putting in your ear and getting wax out of it, which is how a lot of us came up against it when we were growing up. Endless spices that they looked after themselves. The reason I'm talking about it in relation to the Little Museum is there's a tea packet, one of their branded tea packets in the collection, which is beautiful. And they took tea and coffee very, very seriously. They had their own tea mixing warehouse out in Rathfarnham. And they had stores not just in O'Connell Street, but in Dorset Street, in Blackrock, in Dundrum, in Malahide. They were a huge Dublin institution, really important. And there is a lovely book written by one of their later scions that anybody can read if they can get it from the library. But they closed in '69. But I was living in very serious poverty. Well, not really. I had a job, but nobody I knew had any money in Mountjoy Square in the late 70s, early 80s. And I think it was the early 80s that word suddenly came that Findlaters were having a wine sale. The old Findlaters cellar was going to be cleared out once and for all, and everything was going dirt cheap. So get yourself down there fast. So I did, and I got 6 bottles of beautiful Portuguese Dow wine, Giuliana, which I'm sure you're interested in. That was just sensational. And it cost £3 a bottle or something. It was nothing. I should have bought more, but I didn't have enough money to get any more than that. But it meant the North Inner City was swimming in very good wine for quite a while after that all happened. I lived in Mountjoy Square at the time, and everyone was delighted with themselves. So that was my last experience of Findlaters. And I think it's very interesting in the history of food culture in Dublin, that you had an entirely different city during those early decades of the 20th century, where there were stores like Findlaters selling all these extraordinary and wonderful things that we didn't see for a long time afterwards. And you had, for example, lunch counters in bars where you got a free set of snacks of a highly delightful and varied kind. And the last one of those I remember was O'Brien's of Leeson Street, which is still there, a lovely bar. That used to have a jar of pickled eggs on the counter. And you could have one of those for nothing if you wanted. So there were traditions about food consumption and presentation and variety that were all there many, many years ago. We think since Elizabeth David wrote her wonderful book on French and Italian cooking, that was the first time Ireland ever discovered things like pasta and artichokes and avocados. Mais non, they were all there back much earlier. Mm. Everyone took it all very seriously, and with great hotels and restaurants too. So, mourning a time that has passed, but that is preserved in the little museum for our delectation.
One reader here has just actually posted in asking, I wonder what the most popular snacks in Dublin now are. I'd say that's...
Spice bags?
I have a 21-year-old brother who would agree with you on that very much.
I think they're very popular, yeah.
Well, they watch this space, they may end up in the museum down the road.
You have to, yeah.
But I guess kind of this conversation is really focusing on ordinary and kind of everyday items. And I think at the moment, something that's not ordinary, but usually would be the tram system. I know most of us spend time every day on a Luas or a Dart or whatever it might be. Obviously it's something I haven't personally seen in about 2.5 months now at this stage. But I know we have a couple of tram tickets in the museum from back in the 1940s, I think they were. And you were saying that there's some interesting stories that they give you some insight into society at the time.
Well, again, they're objects that everybody used at the time. Everyone got the trams. The trams were owned by William Martin Murphy, who was the villain who opposed James Larkin and who owned the Irish Independent, and I think the Imperial Hotel for a while. And he has gone down as the great villain opposing the working class in Dublin. But he built a tram system that covered 60 miles of track, and they were beautiful trams. And I had occasion to look at one of the timetables once. And the timetables are gorgeous and very well laid out. And you can see how frequently the trams traveled to where they were going. But they also had symbols. So they have a page of symbols that tell you what these symbols mean. And we think that is because if people were not numerate, if they didn't understand numbers, the symbol would tell them. 2 red circles might say Rathmines, and a yellow triangle might be Howth, whatever it is. If you want to see it, it's online on the National Archives website, and it's a really beautiful thing. But of course, we did away with them and thought that the almighty automobile was going to be the solution to all of our problems. And now we're right back where we started. And whenever I do presentations about the turn of the last century, I always show a picture of a tram coming up North Earl Street and say, oh, look, there's the Lewis. And then not the Lewis, because we did away with those beautiful trams and we had to build the whole thing again. And this is the sort of mistakes that we make. And, you know, it's fun to look back at them. But the 2 little tickets that we have ads on the back of them. And this is the kind of thing that really brings you into the period. So one of them is for Bradmola silk stockings. It's 1941. The war is on. Silk stockings are as scarce as hen's teeth. I won't say what women would do to get their hands on silk stockings back then, but they would have done a lot. Silk stockings are now completely gone out. Nobody's bothered about them anymore. That's all over. And Bradmola silk stockings vanished into obscurity a long time ago. But the other one is Shaw's Ham and Bacon. And Shaw's Ham and Bacon is still with us today. And you see ads on the television for it. So there's continuity in the museum stuff as well as change. You can see things that have lasted and continued over the years that give a sense of, I mean, we have vandalized Dublin very badly, let's face it. All sorts of lovely places are gone that shouldn't have gone. But other things survive. And in a way, these small objects are the thing that connect us right back to very vivid memories of an ordinary lifetime.
I see 2 questions that a couple of attendees are writing here that you might have some thoughts on, Catriona. We've a couple of guests who are wondering, you know, what other trends have come around and come back, but also, you know, what did a woman's work in the city look like in the time period that we're talking about there?
Well, it changes all the time. I mean, you're starting at the beginning of the 20th century, you're starting to see women moving into things like being what were called then typewriters. My daughter is a typewriter. That, you know, clerks earning their own money. That fashion is affected by this because women are far more mobile out in the streets. Middle class women, I mean, working class women were always mobile and out in the streets. They had to work to support their families, and many of them would have been street dealers selling clothes, fruit and vegetables, all of those, in the many markets along the side of the streets in Dublin. But you get these young women who are starting to get interested in having a professional sort of life of their own. And skirts go up because they don't want to be trailing about the place in these floor-length skirts that are going to pick up dust and dirt. So you see the skirts going up, ankles being exposed, oh dear, and very nice little shoes with Cuban heels. So they start doing that in the sort of turn of the last century, around the 1900s onwards. The revolution doesn't really, if it is a revolution, which I would contest quite a bit, doesn't really change things for women except negatively, in the sense that a lot of women got involved. It didn't work, but it was serious engagement with the 1916 Rising, with the War of Independence, and indeed the Civil War. And the objective after the Civil War is over is to send women back into the kitchen, effectively, like stop them working. All the laws come in about women having to give up their jobs when they're married. I mean, young women, when I talk to them these days, do not believe that women in the civil service had to give up their jobs when they got married until the 1970s. And they think this is like some strange rule from medieval times. But it's within living memory, and it had to be fought very hard to get it. But gradually, as the century goes on, all sorts of things start to happen. Women start to get much better jobs in the public service, which is quite enlightened in terms of how it, of course, pays them differently, and they have to leave when they're married, but they will hire women to do all kinds of interesting things. It takes a long time before we get a woman Secretary General of a department. That happens in the 1960s, and that's a great moment. And of course, they are working as retail staff all the time and in the hospitality industry as they are right through. Maids, waitresses, all that kind of stuff is still going on. I remember there was a fascinating document. There was a girl who lost her maid's outfits. Maids had to supply their own aprons and caps, right? And she lost them in the 1916 Rising. She was working in the Imperial Hotel, and she put in a compensation claim because she couldn't work without her outfit. And she lived from week to week, as a lot of people do now. That's another thing that's come around, is very, very low-paid, insecure employment, which is a disgrace. But that was very common at that time. And she got something, but nothing like enough to actually, and I often wonder what happened to her. You know, did she manage? I hope maybe she got married or something, because that would have been one of the only ways out of that dilemma. So yeah, women's work increases right through the century. And then, you know, we get eventually the second wave of feminism at the end of the 60s, moving into the 70s. And that really changes everything for women. It's a huge decade of change for women's rights, for women's working rights, for things like maternity leave, all those things that you would want to have for working women.
I think it's, as you were mentioning there, I think it's the time frame in which all of this is happening is what's so incredible to actually learn and figure out. Like, I remember maybe 5 years ago at this stage, this is a subject that actually I was speaking about internally in the museum with a few colleagues, and was realizing just how recent some of this history was, and the fact that it was my grandmother's generation who was in this situation. And that was actually what prompted us internally to go and actually write a women's history tour and to try and actually bring those stories into the museum and into the collection. And it's fascinating to hear kind of a bit more of the backstory. And I do think understanding and awareness is a key part of it.
It is, but the other interesting thing that's probably underexplored is business women. That was one area that the state couldn't interfere with you in. If you decided to open your own business, you'd get on with it. If you're making money, they couldn't touch you. So there's quite a few examples of women like that who just keep going. And of course, there are women farmers who are usually women farmers either because they didn't marry, although it would be unusual to find an unmarried woman farmer. They're usually widows whose husbands have died. But they're well able to run quite complex organizations and do all of that. So in every area of life where men can prosper, women can too, except that it's harder for them to do it. And the prevailing culture at the time is hugely important, in the sense that it was seen by everyone that your highest destiny as a woman was to be a wife and mother, and there was no reason for you to want anything else and get on with it. That doesn't change until Betty Friedan discovers the feminine mystique in 1957. And then everything starts to change slowly.
It is. That brings us up to where we find ourselves today, where we're working towards. And I think with this idea of background, kind of, I guess, the impact of individual women and what the impact an individual can have. Giuliana, I'm going to ask you, obviously, the wine that we're drinking this evening is called Dona Paula. Is that an actual woman? Is that an actual person, or where does that come from?
Yes, it's an actual person. It's a woman. We are talking about 1818 to 100 years. And the name of Doña Paula was born from Doña Paula Jaraquemada. Doña Paula was a Latin American heroine who, at the time of Latin American independence, saw herself on her house, and he received the army that was retreating after being defeated in Chile. The head of the expedition, the General José de San Martín, that she's very generous. She was very generous, and the attitude of Doña Paula Jaraquemada, and he agreed on convert his house into the headquarters of the troops. When the opposite army found that they are staying there, they went to confront Doña Paula, and she denied that the soldiers were there, and the soldiers were hiding there. And she put her own life at risk to save them. And nowadays, the restaurant of the Santa Rita winery in Chile, the name is Doña Paula. And in Argentina, our winery, it's Doña Paula too, in his honor.
That's fantastic. What a great story. My goodness. A heroine of the revolution. Fantastic. Here's to Donna. We'll drink to her.
Very much so. It's and actually, Giuliana, a couple of people have been asking in the questions here, if someone was planning to actually take a trip to Mendoza or to take a trip to Argentina, you know, could you do a tour of wineries? Could you take an excursion? Like if you were giving advice to those of us sitting in quarantine, planning a whole day.
First of all, if you visit Mendoza, you have to taste all the possible wines you can taste for all the wineries. It's the most important thing. And for me, the best way to know Mendoza and to visit the places are you can rent a car. And for sure, you need to organize tours. Here in Mendoza, we have something called the winery tours, and you can visit by car or by bicycle, wherever you want, almost 5 or 7 wineries in one day. And you can taste all the wines since you're listening to classical music, or we have different events related to rock.
Okay.
So you can taste wine listening to a rock concert. They are very interesting things to do here in Mendoza. But for me, the best way to organize to know Mendoza and to visit Mendoza, it's by renting a car.
Okay, that's it's fascinating, and it's kind of, I think, a holiday traveling from winery to winery does definitely sound like something very favorable. And
Yes.
throw in a rock.
You have to think that you're driving into the vineyards and with the mountain so close and drinking wine. It's a beautiful experience for us that we live here. It's something that we are used to do it, but for the people who came to visit Mendoza, it's amazing.
And I understand that your winery, like the Dona Paula, is known as an estate winery, which is quite an unusual thing in Argentina. Could you just explain what that actually means? And
yes, sure. We are, Dona Paula are considered a state winery because we own 100% all the vineyards. That means that we don't buy grapes. We have all our grapes, and all the vineyards are ours, and we produce all the wines with our grapes. So that for us, it's very important because, for example, we can certificate the sustainability certification last year, and we manage in very special way of the grapes. All of our wines are able for people who is vegan or vegetarian people. Not all the wines are available for them. Our wines, you can drink it too. That's why a winery is a state. You can call a state winery when the winery owns 100% the vineyards.
Okay, that's interesting. I didn't know that before. Yeah.
And will that say it on a bottle, or how will I know if a vineyard or a company is?
Maybe some of the, for example, a part of Los Cardos, we have a different line that it's called Dona Paula Estate, but you can put it in the bottles and you can check maybe in the back label too. In some wines they put it there, but not all the wineries are estate. And here in Argentina, in Mendoza particularly, only, I mentioned that we are 150 wineries, only 10 wineries have the sustainable certification.
Okay.
And that's why when you own all your vineyards, it's easier to have it. And it's easier to manage.
It's something to be very proud of. I know sustainability is very much a priority front and center for, I guess, you as a company. Which is,
yes, it's very important for us, and we have a project. I think that maybe we can set it up this year, at the end of the year, that we are going to include in all the back labels that the sustainability certification, because it's very important for us, to the people, to know that all the wines are available for vegan people, for vegetarian people, and how we manage all our vineyards with the dry irrigation. That type of things are very important to communicate to the winery.
It's how to do that kind of clearly and to get across the message, because, you know, if you're accomplishing so much, you should get that word out and clearly communicate it. It's I guess if anyone who's with us has questions, please do be typing them in, and we'll try and get through a few more of them in the next little while. Like, I see a question here that Catriona, you may have an opinion on it, but one guest has asked, you know, is there a must-find item for a museum, like the Little Museum, like a holy grail of items that just hasn't turned up yet? Which I think is quite a fun question.
That is a fun question. I mean, we have a death mask of James Joyce. We have a first edition of Ulysses. They would be seen as key items for Dublin that you'd really like to have. You know, I'd have to think about that because it's such a fascinating question. What would be the thing that you cannot get your hands on that you'd really love to have in the museum? Leave it with me, and you can stick it on. But I mean, I think we have an amazing collection already. We've got things that you wouldn't expect, and there is also a great archive. The Alfie Byrne, the man who was Lord Mayor of Dublin, who our eminent director Trevor White wrote an excellent biography of, all of his papers, and he did say that he was going to put shoes on the footless at one point. Trevor would tell me that's wrong, but I like the story too much and I'm continuing it. So all those papers are there. There's we've got John F. Kennedy's podium that he stood at. That's the thing you would think it would be lovely to have, and we do actually have it. So maybe Robert Emmet's head.
Right. I actually, it's funny that person asked that question. I remember a few years ago, we got a phone call from one of the radio stations saying, "We want to get you an artifact in the next hour. What do you want?" And so we had exactly that immediate response of, if you can ask for anything, your mind and everything.
What would you want?
So we got 2 Boscos donated to us about 50 minutes later. That was a particularly fun and lovely day. But
I did see one of the messages that came up. My eyesight isn't great, so I'm not able to read them all, but one did say that somebody has a Virgin Mary statue with a plastic hat. So maybe that gentleman or woman would like to donate it to the museum because it's a very...
I would imagine my colleague Fiona, who's on the chat here this evening, may have made a note of that.
I'd say she's contacted him already. Yeah.
And I guess kind of another piece that I think, Catriona, I'd be curious to ask you about is on this idea of kind of interesting pieces, or particularly kind of key pieces. I remember you once talking about the Che Guevara image that we have in the museum by Jim Fitzpatrick, and correct me if I'm remembering this wrongly, but you were saying it was arguably one of the most successful artefacts in Ireland in the 20th century. Could you tell me what you mean?
It was. I mean, Che Guevara wasn't a great revolutionary. He kind of made a mess of everything he did as a revolutionary, but he was incredibly handsome. He was Byronic with curling black hair. And that was a fabulous photograph. And Jim Fitzpatrick was smart enough to transform it into the thing he did. And didn't, of course, get copyright clearance. So he didn't make, I imagine, very much money out of it. But that was the have-to-have poster for everybody in the late 1960s. It's 1968. And it went all over the world. It became a huge success. It was the iconic image of the handsome, doomed revolutionary that every woman wanted to have as her boyfriend, and every bloke wanted to be. And in fact, she would have been useless at both things. There you go. Fidel Castro, who was a far more successful revolutionary, didn't get the same attention, possibly because Jim didn't think he was worth it. But Che became that iconic figure. He went from history into mythology through that particular poster, and still is there to a large degree. And of course, he had Irish connections. There were Lynches connected into the Guevara family, and that's all been explored by his biographers, and it's an interesting story. But it's 1968, it's the year after another iconic moment, which is Sergeant Pepper, which I saved up all my pocket money to buy when the day it came out in 1967. And then a year later, we have Che Guevara appearing. They were very different times, I can tell you, the late 60s. But we should be very proud that one of our own produced this extraordinary image, and that it has such purchase everywhere, and several really great album covers too. Very talented artist.
Very much so. It's I see a note that has come in from Trevor, who is obviously on the call this evening, saying basically, yes, please, to the Virgin Mary donation.
Good. Excellent.
That is it's funny, kind of half watching scrolling text to the side of my eye. So, Giuliana, a question that someone else is asking just while I'm flicking through them here, I can see a few more. One person was asking, how does a Cabernet Sauvignon from Argentina differ from, say, an Australian or French kind of counterpart?
Yes, I think that it's kind of philosophical answer, because all the people said that the European wines are focused on the terroir, on the land they came from. And the New World wines that are Chile and Argentina are focused in the grape, the type of grape. But here in Dona Paula, we don't think it's like this, because, for example, we have an investigation called Terroir in Focus. Depending the characteristics of the terroir and the climate, we select what type of grape we are going to plant there. So maybe you are going to have difference because they are the first producers of wine, and of course, maybe they have more, there are more oak wines, but I think that it depends the winery. I agree with a lot of wineries. The most important thing is the type of grape, but for us, it's not like that. We really investigate and do investigation of the terroir, and we decided which grape we are going to plant in every vineyard, depending the characteristics of the vineyard. The characteristics are of the soil, of the climate, and all that. We take into account all these type of things to do a wine. It's not the same, the vineyards and the characteristics of the soil, for example, of the Los Cardos and from Selección de Bodega, that it's an icon for us. We're going to select where to plant depending the terroir.
Okay, it's amazing speaking to yourself and to speak to some of your colleagues who I've met over the years in kind of conversation in Argentina, and this kind of ties into a question that someone asked a little while ago. The passion for wine production is, shall I say, very visible.
It's real. Yes, it's real.
Is this something that, you know, it's one user earlier asked the question of kind of what sort of an education and a background did you come from? Like, how does someone get into working in a winery over in Argentina?
I think that a lot of people living here in Mendoza want to work in a winery because it's our culture. All the people here loves wine, and it's like you live in Mendoza and you need to know about wine. It's like you must know about wine. And for example, I have been working in different industries before to work here in a winery. I work in Hyatt Corporation and a different, but in the winery in Dona Paula, I find, like you said, my passion, because it's amazing all the things that you start to learn and to understand. And when you hold a glass of wine, you can identify a lot of things that maybe after you work in a winery or you don't know about wine, you can identify. And you start to learn this type of things about that it's not the same a wine that provides from an altitude vineyard, and it's not the same wine. They're not the same the characteristics of the Malbec, of the Cabernet Sauvignon. It's amazing. The winery, working in a winery is amazing, and the passion of the wine, it's real. It's not like something that the people say. It's real.
It's
for example, sorry, we have in the winery Martin Kaiser. Martin works in Dona Paula since, I don't know, 15 years maybe, and he started in the viticulturist team, and this year Tim Atkin said that he's the viticulturist of the year.
Congratulations.
So, yeah, imagine it's like it's very important, and most of people start working in the winery and they work for all their life.
Right. Mm-hmm. It's funny because you use the phrase, you know, it's very much, it's a part of our culture, and I think, you know, that message really resonates with, I guess, Catriona, what you're talking about this evening when talking about how artifacts in our collection actually tell the story of real people and real lives. And I guess I'd be curious on that. Would there be one or two pieces, Catriona, in our collection that kind of personally would resonate with you in terms of your own view of your Dublin?
Well, there's an advertisement for Blackrock Baths, where you can come and see water ballet, water polo, high diving competitions, all kinds of interesting stuff from, I think, the 40s. And Black Rock Baths was still there. Alas, it no longer is. Another example of vandalism. When I was going to school in Black Rock, and I was a very badly behaved schoolgirl and used to mitch from school with a friend of mine. And we would go down to the baths and sneak in. And the guy there, who was incredibly patient and sweet, would say, "On the bounce again, girls, are you?" And we'd say, "Yeah, we are." And we'd sit and drink. Her father was a docks policeman. We used to drink whiskey in Black Rock Baths when we were 16 years old. So it was a lovely place. And again, those kind of, the outdoor baths around Dublin Bay were really beautiful amenities for ordinary people to use. And I think the Clontarf baths, which are quite near to me now, have been restored, but as a private enterprise rather than a publicly available amenity. And that's a shame, because they were all lovely places. Seawater baths, they don't need to be too posh or too lovely. They were just basic concrete structures and painted blue and white, and lovely places to be in the summertime. So I remember that. And the other one I remember is my Wadi, which everyone has forgotten about now and is deeply uncool at this point in our lives. But my Wadi was the cordial that you got in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, that you had to dilute in order to get a glass of very watery tasting, non-tasting of any fruit known to man, drink that everybody wanted to have. And a friend of mine was just telling me the other night that in her garden in Cork years ago when she was a kid, a terrible battle broke out between her and her friends about my Wadi, because one of them had over-diluted the my Wadi. And this was an unforgivable sin. She was expelled from the Garden of Eden and turned out and never got back in. But again, another thing that's gone, but had 6 different flavors of not fruit, but it was still something everybody sort of had in their household. So it's endlessly fascinating to see what the texture of people's lives was like and how that works. I mean, the big political and literary moments are fascinating, and I could have talked all night about either subject. It would have been great. But I think it's more interesting that we have a museum now, finally, a museum in Dublin that is focusing on ordinary stories, on ordinary objects, on things that people immediately jump up and say, "Oh yeah, I remember that. We had that in our kitchen." To me, that's a democratization of museum going, and that's why I'm so fond of the museum.
Yeah, the words "I remember" are 2 of our favourite words to hear in the building, and it's something that a huge number of conversations begin on a daily basis actually from those 2 words. And one artifact that I find begins an awful lot of conversations in the building is actually the Millennium milk bottle, which is the number of conversations that go, "I've got one of them somewhere in my attic." And
I know. People kept them. I mean, I don't have one. The Millennium was a sort of a joke. I mean, they made up the date because they needed to do something to cheer the city up in 1988. And it just really didn't work. Nobody took it seriously and everyone laughed at it, including the milk bottles, which are quite nice things. But my favorite memory from 1988 was Leonard Cohen came to Dublin. And he was playing, in the National Stadium, which some of our audience may remember as the only venue for rock and folk music, and anybody who came here had to come there. I actually had the pleasure of working on the turnstiles there when I was at school, because I worked for Golden Disc, and I got to meet the most amazing people, including my hero, Peter Green, one of the great guitar players of all time, before he went nuts and vanished into the oblivion that he shouldn't have gone into. But Leonard Cohen comes out on stage and he says, "Hi, everybody. It's great to be back in Dublin. I hear this is your Millennium year. This must be one of the original buildings." In other words, this building must be 1,000 years old because it's clearly falling apart and everything is wrong with it. And then played a wonderful gig and was just marvelous. And that's my memory of 1988. Alas, I do not have a milk bottle, but I don't have to because there's one in the little museum.
There is indeed. My mum claims that there's one in my childhood home, but she's not been able to produce it yet. So the jury is still out on that one.
Well, you can't legitimately go after her for it because she knows now that you have one in the museum, so you don't need her one. She might.
True. It's or if it ever goes missing, I know who to talk to. Shall we put it that way?
Exactly.
So we're kind of coming to the end of the evening here nearly now. Just kind of 1 or 2 final questions that a couple of people have flown in that we might just touch on. Giuliana, someone has written in here wondering, is this year going to be a good year for wine? How is...
Yes, 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 it's going to be, because as I said to you previously, this was a very, very atypical year regarding the climate here. And all this to end the harvest 1 month earlier, and we are going to have more concentrated red wines and more fresh white wines. So it's going to be a really good year for us.
Okay,
and for all the industry too.
Good. Well, we can maybe do a tasting of that in the museum in a year or two when we're back open and all together at one of our lectures, maybe. So we'll have that to hopefully look forward to in the not too distant future. And then, Catriona, I've got a question that I've always been curious about, so I may as well, I guess, ask. Why not take the opportunity? Like, you joined the board of the museum back in, I think it was 2018, and I remember it was a day that we were really very proud of, but I never actually asked you from your own perspective, what motivated you to actually get involved?
Well, I think it's a wonderful project, and Dublin has always needed a museum, and it's been a discussion. There was a Dublin City Museum in South William Street, which now has become those beautiful civic rooms, which are lovely. But, you know, arguably, I mean, my feeling is that the Little Museum should be a national cultural institution in the way that the Crawford Art Gallery is in Cork, because it is the only museum we have about the history of Dublin alone. And it's difficult. And I mean, your listeners and watchers may know that we're moving building, that we're moving next door. All of this costs money. All of this is difficult. All of this takes a huge amount of work from a very dedicated staff. But the reason I joined the board is twofold. One, I genuinely believe in the collecting policies that the Little Museum has and the way that things are displayed and conserved, because I care about that. Things are properly looked after. And I think, Sarah, you've organized recently our accreditation at the European Standard Museum, which is really important in terms of how we look after our collections. That really matters. And two, the overwhelming charm of Mr. Trevor White, whom nobody could possibly resist if he were to ask you to do anything. So they're the two reasons I joined. I'm delighted to be part of it, and it's lovely to be able to help out anyway. It's a really important enterprise, and it's hard times at the moment. The museum thrives on human contact and having people coming in the doors, interacting with the collection, asking questions, giving their own stories, all of that. And I know how difficult it is for the staff not to be able to do that. Hopefully sometime pretty soon, we'll be able to get back on the road again, and you can all come in and see the wonderful items that we have on display.
Absolutely. Well, they're very generous words, and it's lovely to hear. And you may have given a nice little exclusive there that the museum has just secured accreditation from the Heritage Council, which I think they're due to announce in a couple of weeks' time. So that's
I'm sorry, I didn't realise it was a secret.
No.
But anyway, consider it a scoop.
No, good news is good news. We'll take the celebration. But I think that's it for this evening. Thank you both so much for being so generous with your time. Giuliana, it's been fascinating to hear the stories that you've had to tell and to teach us a bit about the wine. I saw someone asked if we enjoyed it. Yes, I thought it was beautiful and I would buy it again. So that's always my judge of whether I've enjoyed a bottle of wine or not. And I guess kind of in terms of what next week we have in store, next week I'm going to be joined by your colleague Oscar Salas, who's one of your winemakers, I believe, and he's going to be hosting a tasting of I'm going to be tasting a Santa Rita Medio Real Reserva Chardonnay, which some people may remember having sampled previously at some of our talks and lectures. So I'm looking forward to that, and I believe it's available in Tesco. And our museum guest next week is going to be Simon O'Connor, who was the former long-term curator with us in the Little Museum and has been a great friend to us for a great many years. And so he's going to spend a bit of time with me reflecting on some of the exhibitions that we created and some of the education projects and the different, I guess, some of the key moments that we had during his time with us. And I'm sure he'll touch on his current role as director of Molly, the Museum of Literature, and it'll be really interesting to hear how they're getting on, and as you said, Catriona, what's going on behind the scenes as we're all working towards reopening. But to those of you who've attended this evening, we will circulate a link for next week's session. We hope you'll join us again. But I guess Catriona, Giuliana, thank you both so much for being so generous with your time and your stories. I truly appreciate it. So thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Lovely to meet you, Giuliana. Good luck with this year's wine.
Thank you very much, Catriona. Thank you very much to all to be here, to hear from us. And well, cheers from Argentina, cheers from Dublin, and cheers for all the moments that are here.
Absolutely. Salud. Salud.
Salud.
Cheers. Okay, goodbye everyone. Have a nice evening.
Okay.